Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here today to watch this In Conversation event with Betty Walker and Gracie Taylor. My name's Lucy, I'm an editor at Avon Books, and I'm delighted to be here today to chat to Betty and Gracie about their brilliant new saga novels, Wartime with the Cornish Girls and Edie's Home for Strays, both of which are excitingly hitting the shelves today. So let's jump into it. Both Wartime with the Cornish Girls and Edie's Home for Strays are now available to Saga fans in paperback. So without giving too much away, could you both tell us a little bit about your books? Betty, how about you go first?
Hi, thank you for having me, by the way. It's a great day. Yeah, Wartime with the Cornish Girls. Let's do a quick, oh, here it is. I know, it's so shiny and lovely. Yeah, it's a wartime saga that is set in Porthcurno in Cornwall, on the sort of southwest tip, the far southwest tip of Cornwall. And I discovered that there's a secret communications base there, and that's where my book is set. So I've got these three wonderful characters. A local girl called Hazel, who has a son who's desperate to join up and she's trying to stop him, and Eva, who's a chorus girl who's been a bit naughty and been sent down to Cornwall to stay with her soldier father, and sorry, completely blank.
Hazel?
No, I done Hazel.
We've done Hazel, Eva.
And Violet. So yeah, and Violet, who is my East Ender, who's my East End girl, and she has sadly got two nieces who've been orphaned during the Blitz, and so she's bringing them down to Cornwall out of harm's way, and the three of them sort of converge on this secret base, and there's some pretty dark and dangerous times, but they sort of stick together and their friendship sees them through with some pretty, interesting things happening along the way.
Oh, definitely. No, it's a real story of friendship and warmth. It's brilliant. And Gracie, how about Edie's Home for Strays?
Well, Edie's Home for Strays, there we go. It's my,
my
first saga as Gracie Taylor. So I've got my heroine, Edie. She's 21 years old. She's a Londoner. She's, at the start of the story, she's quite naive, but she's very big-hearted and she's very courageous, and she wants to do her bit for the war effort. And what she really wants to do is join the Wrens. But her family doctor tells her that because of her childhood TB that's left her with scarring of the lungs, that she won't be able to pass the medical to serve in any of the women's auxiliary forces. But he says that he can sign her as fit and healthy to be a land girl. So she's quite dissatisfied with this. She really wanted to do something big and important for the war, and she feels like, land girl just doesn't fulfil that. But she goes off to Cumberland to work as a land girl, what is now Cumbria, but was at the time was Cumberland. And she is billeted in a manor house, which is owned by a widowed lady whose son has gone off to, he's in the Navy. And she's basically closed herself up since her husband died. She's living there with her grief. She's asked for the help of a land girl in the gardens because her gardener is getting on a bit and he can't cope on his own. But she's reluctant to have anybody in the house. She just wants to shut herself away and not be bothered by anybody. So she works half her time there and half her time on a local farm. There's a very grumpy farmer that she doesn't take to at all and dislikes very much at first. Spoiler alert: she learns to love him, and gradually it's the story of how gradually she tries to open the heart and open the home of this lady that she's been assigned to live with, Prue, and to help her to realise that there's a long-standing love affair going on with the gardener. But he's in love with her, but she has never acknowledged this, and so Edie helps her to realise that, and she helps her to bond with two evacuees who are assigned to them as well, from London, and gradually they start to offer a home to orphaned animals that have been abandoned or left as strays as part of the war. So that was inspired by the real life story of Fern Animal Sanctuary. The pet holocaust at the start of the war, when people felt that it would be better for their pets if they had them humanely put down because of the horrors of the war, because of the shortages that they assumed were to come. A lot of them later regretted it and felt that they'd been tricked into this by the government, sort of scaremongering really, and regretted having their pets put down. But there were also a lot of pets that were left as strays or had been abandoned when their owners had gone off to fight or had been killed in the bombings. And so Fern Animal Sanctuary, the original founder of that, she opened up this sanctuary to give them a home, and that's what inspired this story as well.
Yeah, oh, it's such a lovely story. It's got so many animals and children running through it. It's so heartwarming. But what drew you both to the saga genre? Was it something that you'd always kind of wanted to try your hand at, or did it come as a bit of a surprise to you? Betty?
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise, actually. What happened was I just had this idea for the story, which was quite a high concept, and I knew it had to be a saga, and I'd never written one before, but I just sort of, took the plunge, and it turned out that actually, it really fitted my voice. So wonderful.
It really does. And Gracie?
I'd always wanted to write a story set in the Second World War. I always had a fascination for that period. I was raised largely by my grandparents. My granddad used to talk a lot about his experiences as a little boy on the home front. He was 5. He was 6 when the war began. He was 12 when it ended, so it was sort of his formative years, really. And he was an evacuee himself as well. He was evacuated to Linley Camping near Grassington. So I sort of developed a fascination with it as a child, what it must have been like living through that era. And I also used to work for a nostalgia magazine, which is called Down Your Way. It was a Yorkshire magazine. People used to write in with their memories, and a lot of people used to write in with their experiences of the home front or serving in the war, and I used to sort of squirrel away little bits and bobs of stories. I thought, oh, I could use that in a book.
Yeah.
I wrote the saga. I'd written something like 7 or 8 romantic comedies, but I'd always had in the back of my mind that one day I was going to write a story set in the Second World War. So yeah, it was. I thought it's going to be a challenge, but it was one that I really enjoyed.
Well, we've spoken about the inspiration that you've both taken for your novels from real life places, real life events, but how do you tend to develop your stories beyond that initial spark? Are you both serious plotters, or do you prefer to kind of dive in and develop the plot as you go?
Well, I'm definitely a plotter. I can't start work on a book without knowing all the way through to the end. I know lots of writers don't ever do that and think it's totally boring, but I would be terrified if I started writing without knowing exactly what was going to happen. So that's basically what I do. I just sit down and write out an outline. Sometimes I actually do it chapter by chapter, but I'm very flexible with it. I don't if I go off piste, if you like, I just adapt as I go along.
And how about you, Gracie?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle of a plotter and what they call a pantser, who write by the seat of your pants. So I'm a fan of the Save the Cat method, which a lot of writers follow as well. It was originally a screenwriting guide, and it was then sort of adapted by novelists. So usually I work out what I think the key points are going to be of the plot. So what's going to happen, the big event that's going to happen in the middle of the novel, the crisis that will occur near the end, the catalyst that sends them off into their adventure in the first place. And then I start writing with not much more than that, really. And then when I get to about 20% of the way through, I stop and write a fuller plot out, so I know where I'm going with it. It often changes while I'm writing as well.
I think I would definitely be a planner as well. And I think back to kind of university essays, I have to curtail my planning time at the start of the exams. But how do you find, does your personal life ever influence your writing? Do you ever find yourself basing characters on people you know? No?
No. People go on.
I've never used a person sort of in their entirety and just dumped them into a book, but sometimes I'll notice a little quirk or a little habit or a little expression or way of the sort of mode of speech or something. I think, oh, that's an interesting feature, and then I'll squirrel that away and write it. But I think family and friends probably start to get paranoid if you start doing that too much, don't they? She's gone quiet. She's noticed something.
No, I couldn't put a real person in my book because I'd be worried that they wouldn't do what I needed them to do. The real person would start to intrude and say, no, I'm not going to do that. Occasionally when someone really annoys me, I'll put them in a book and have something really dreadful happen to them, and it's kind of cathartic. little bit of revenge.
I, that's how I think I would work. I actually work with a lot of crime and thriller authors as well, and they definitely sneak some real life people into their novels. So it's always interesting. But I think what a lot of people don't realize about the writing process is quite how extensive it is from first writing that book to getting it published and on shelves. It's far more in depth and a lot longer than just getting that initial draft down on paper. So obviously, you've got your several rounds of edits, you've got the campaign, and then you've got publication. But what is it that is your favorite part of the process? Is it that initial draft, or working on your edits, or is it when the book is finally released? And I promise not to be offended if it's not working on the edits.
Well, for me, it's before I even start writing. It's that beautiful moment, it usually lasts a few days, but it might be a few weeks when I haven't started the book and I'm still planning and it's all perfect in my head. As soon as you start writing, things go wrong. It never ever becomes exactly what you wanted. So I like that little spark moment just before the book begins, where it's, everything's still to play for.
And what about you, Gracie?
I think Dorothy Parker said that she hated writing but loved having written, and I always feel like that when I'm drafting. Like, it feels like absolute rubbish when I'm writing it. I'm thinking this is awful. Then I read it back and think, oh, that's all right. It's not so bad. I can polish that up, and it might not be too bad. So I think my favourite bit's when I get to the copy edit stage, because that's when it feels polished then, and like it's been through all these rounds of edits, and it's a final proper book, and I can read it through like a reader at that point, rather than like the person who's written it and just sort of let myself get lost in the story a little bit. So I like that part, but with this one as well, compared to rom-coms, I really enjoyed the research. It's like going down these little tangents and wormholes and finding out all these interesting things and reading people's diaries and sort of all the stories of their lives. It's brilliant.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. I think actually what I was going to say next was that personally my favorite part of the process is obviously the editing, but I particularly love editing saga and historical novels because I find that the Google search engine is my best friend when working on the historical detail. But what do you think, if you had to think of something off the top of your head, is the strangest thing that you've ever had to research as part of researching your novels, and how careful do you need to be when fact checking your writing in this genre?
Well, I've written tons of historicals way back. I wrote a ton of, I think 10 Tudor novels, and I've written a load of Regencies as well in the past. And I think probably one of the strangest facts that I found out, though maybe not the strangest thing, was that Elizabeth I, you would not believe this, it wouldn't just take 2 or 3 hours to dress her, it would take 2 or 3 hours to undress her, because you had to put the sleeves on individually and they had to be sewn onto the dress, and then it all had to be unpicked. And of course, the sleeves were all covered in beautiful seed pearls and jewels, and so they were priceless. And so you couldn't like rip it all off. You had to do it really carefully. It took hours. And there was even a little book which was for noting down any jewels that came off an outfit, so they never lost track. So that was kind of strange. I would never have believed that if I hadn't researched it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I often think that I'd love to have someone dressing me each day, though, to be honest. Gracie, how about you?
I think the thing with writing World War II era is that it's living memory for people, isn't it? So people are alive who lived through that era, or their children will remember their parents talking about it. So you do have to be extra careful that you get everything right. So I spent a lot of time researching food. I think I spent about a month just like making recipes out of this Marguerite Patton book called The Victory Cookbook, which I had. Just pretended it was research, but it's really just, I love stodgy food. So coffee, hash and cheese puddings and things all month. One of the hardest things I found to research was prices of things varied so widely from place to place and throughout the different times of the war when different shortages were happening. So I spent ages trying to find the price of an oxtail. So I'm like, I want to buy an oxtail to make soup. So that was quite difficult to research. I think the weirdest thing I've ever discovered as part of research overall was I write short stories as part of these anthologies, these Miss Moonshine anthologies with a number of other romance writers. And I stumbled over this very strange incident in history where a woman claimed to have been contacted by the late Ian Fleming, and he dictated to her an entire James Bond novel. I think it's called.
Oh my goodness.
She actually, her and her father had an interview with his brother, who asked them various questions to try and work out if this was true or not. And sort of, such as, what was the name of the boy you punched in the face at Eton, or something like that. Not very strange anyway. So he concluded in the end that while she certainly hadn't had the novel dictated to her by the ghost of Ian Fleming, that she believed that she had. And it was a bit anyway. I referenced this in the story. It's all a bit odd.
I don't know how you manage to keep on track, honestly, with the writing and the researching. I'd just be going off on a tangent all the time. And I was a history student, so I know how the research can really take you down some interesting rabbit holes. But speaking about the publishing process, there are obviously so many ways for writers to get started in the industry and get their first kind of break, as it were, with their first novel. So how did you both go about first becoming published writers?
Oh, mine is very strange and convoluted. Back in the day when I was in my early to mid 20s, I was a world-class snooker player.
Wow.
And I played on the Women's World Circuit. And then I kind of left under a cloud. We'll move quickly on from that. And I wrote a poem, I think possibly about snooker, but I'm not sure. But it had a little biog about me. And it was in London Magazine. And then the London Review of Books contacted me and asked me to do a diary piece for them. And that was Diary of a Hustler. And then I was headhunted by Curtis Brown to write a novel about being a woman snooker player. And that's how I got into the industry many, many years ago, back in 98.
Wow, that is not what I was expecting you to say at all.
There you go.
And Gracie, how did you first become a published novel?
I can't follow that, I don't think.
I know.
I wrote my first rom-com in November 2015 as part of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. It was just a personal challenge, really, to see if I could do it, because I'd always wondered if I had a book in me or not. And then I was completely naive and green. I didn't know about anything. It would have been really useful if I'd known at that time about the Romantic Novelist Association's New Writers Scheme, but I didn't. I had this manuscript and I didn't know what to do with it. So I heard about a digital first imprint of HarperCollins, which was at that time called Harper Impulse, but is now One More Chapter. And they guaranteed feedback for everybody who submitted to them. So I thought, oh great, well I can get some feedback and that might help me work out what to do with it. Anyway, they offered to publish it, so I was very surprised by that. And then I started writing my second novel, and I approached agents with that one, and that's how I got my agent is Laura Longwick at MBA. So 6 years later, and I've got 12 published novels in 3 different genres under 3 different names.
Wow. And you both write under many different genres, so that must be really interesting to come to Saga with fresh eyes from a different genre. But obviously we have been in the midst of a pandemic for the last year and a half or so, hopefully on the outs, but writing can already be quite a solo endeavour. So I'm interested to know whether you think the pandemic has affected your writing in any way, and if so, how that might have been.
Well, I've always been a cafe writer, so it hit me pretty hard, actually, not being able to go out. I like to put my headphones on and bash the keyboard for an hour or two in my favourite cafe, watch the world go by. And instead, I've had to learn to write at home, which is actually really difficult because I've got 5 kids and, it's a busy household. So I've learned to sit in bed, which is one of the few rooms I can be in where I'm unlikely to be disturbed, and write on a lap tray in bed. So that, it really, I think it probably cut my output by about a third because, I write a lot of books.
Yeah, you do. I'm quite an office person, so working from home, the silence was too much, and there was a computer program that could emulate cafe noise, which I used to really enjoy. So I think yeah, I mean, it's great. It just makes you feel like you're in the thick of it. And Gracie, how about you?
I used to like to write in pubs and cafes as well, because I used to just eavesdrop people's conversations and think, that's a good plot idea. I've gone in a different direction, so I did miss that. And then also research-wise, it was a bit of a pain because I had various things lined up. I was going to go to Eden Camp in various places, so I couldn't then access But I think the worst thing was the anxiety of it when it was all early sort of March last year, late March, when it all kind of, you got these horrible daily death tolls, and it was awful. I couldn't focus. I couldn't get lost in the story. I couldn't focus on anything except this scary thing that was happening. So I think I lost about a month's worth of writing time. But in the end, you've got your deadline looming. I think you just sort of have to give yourself a slap and say thumbs and seats and get on with it, really. So but, it's a good story to be writing at that time, because the sort of things
Yes.
in the story were the sort of, it did feel like it correlated quite a lot with what we were facing here in the country at the time. So I did sort of channel some of my feelings, I think, some of my anxiety into the anxiety during the war.
And speaking of writing to deadlines, I am honestly in awe of all of my writers and how dedicated they are to these deadlines. Have you ever had writer's block though? And if so, how did you cope with that and with juggling a deadline?
Never had it.
Never.
I had writer's block when I worked as a poet, which I did for about 7 or 8 years. I had it several times then, but with novels, I suppose I just see it as a job. I sit down, I do my daily words, I don't get blocked, thank goodness, so far.
That is great. Fingers crossed. Gracie?
One of my favourite writing books says that there's no such thing as writer's block, there's only perfectionist block, and I think that's resonated quite a lot with me. So just don't worry that you're writing a load of rubbish. It won't be as bad as you think, and even if it is, at least you've written something. You can't edit a blank page. So I just try and remember that. But I think the only time I've ever had anything that's akin to writer's block was when I've had something making me anxious in real life, like the pandemic, or something personal, and it's felt very hard then to get lost in a story. So it's not that I can't write, it's that I can't feel the story and get immersed in it, which you need to do, I think.
I always think the hardest part must be, and this is why I love being an editor, because I've never faced this, but staring at a completely blank page and having to just get that first line down, which is why I always say I would love to write a book, but editing is so much easier because I'm editing what's already there. But I don't know how you guys do it with those massive blank Word documents. It's amazing. And which other authors have inspired you in the publishing process, whether that is other writers in this genre that have inspired these particular novels, or just other writers whose reading you enjoy for pleasure that kind of maybe made you want to get into writing books yourself?
Well, I have an interesting history in that my mum was a big writer, a well-known novelist, and she was Charlotte Lamb, who wrote about over 175 novels, mostly romances, but some suspense as well. And she sadly passed away in 2000. But I think that's probably the writer who inspires me the most. And she amazingly, and as well as writing anything between 8,000 and 10,000 words a day,
wow.
day after day, as well as that, she wrote a diary. And so I have her diaries, and they just make fascinating reading. And I'm constantly, sizing myself up against her and thinking, why am I moaning? She managed to do this, that, and the other. No. She had 5 kids as well.
Wow, that's a lot to live up to as well. A lot of novels.
That too inspires me.
Oh, that's lovely. And Gracie, is there anyone in particular who inspires you in the writing process?
I've always been a big fan of Terry Pratchett. His work ethic was very impressive as well. He was incredibly prolific. I admire any writer who's got that sort of dedication to just getting sitting at your desk every day and just getting those words out there. Stephen King as well. His book on writing is one of those sort of, every writer has to read on writing, or every aspiring writer, and he talks about his work process there, and it's, you can't wait for inspiration to strike. You've got to sit down and you've got to put the hours in. And I think I found that useful when I was starting out, because 100 times I probably tried to start writing a book or a story, and then I'd get about 3,000 words in and I'd think, no, it's rubbish, and abandon it. But people who have a set routine every day, that I really admire. I try to emulate.
I actually read Stephen King's book on writing when I first came into publishing. I thought it might help me. I think it probably has, but I wouldn't like to claim that I'm Stephen King. So, and just before we come to my final question, I am desperate to know, should your books ever be made into TV or film, who would be in your dream cast?
Wow, that's actually a really difficult question. I've been rewatching with my daughter, Gentleman Jack. I don't know if you saw it at all. And it's got Saran, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Saran Jones in it.
Yes.
And, she is just so marvelous and such a character actress. You know, I would love to see her in anything really, playing any part.
She is brilliant. Yeah. I grew up watching her in Coronation Street. So
Right, yeah.
That was filmed near me. I live near.
And Gracie, how about you? Any dream cast members?
Yeah, it was a difficult one. I decided Karen Gillan as the heroine, as Edie. She was Amy Pond in Doctor Who, and Penelope Wilton as Prue. And I quite like the idea of Sean Bean playing the gardener Jack, who's Prue's love interest, because of the sort of Lady Chatterley reflection there. And Aidan Turner as the hero, just because if you can have Aidan Turner in it, you would do, wouldn't you, really?
I mean, yeah. I love the level of thought that's gone into every character.
Yeah.
Okay, so my final question for both of you would be, what would your one tip for any aspiring writer out there be?
Well, I'm probably going to go with what Gracie said about you know, you have to finish what you start. It's what I found is that the psyche doesn't want to work. Your writer's psyche doesn't want to write your book because it's just hard work. So you have to shut off that voice and ignore it and just keep writing, because it will tell you all sorts of lies. It will say, this book is rubbish. You've written that character wrong. This is never going to work. Who's going to read this? You know, you have to ignore that voice because it comes every time you write, and just write it, because you can only see whether a book is good or not when you've finished it and taken a step back to look at it. So I would say, don't drop something halfway through, finish it, and then decide if it's any good.
A good tip. And Gracie, what would your one tip be?
Mine was the same. I'd also say, like, don't get too bogged down in the sort of the minutiae of it. I always struggled with this when I started. I'm a professional editor as well, so you obsess over words and phrases, and like, is this right? Am I, is that the right way of expressing this? Oh, I'm using too many adverbs, and I'm not, she smiled about 5 times in the last paragraph, something like that. But if you get bogged down in that, you'll never finish it. And story is king. So if you think about your structure when you're drafting, you can worry about your polish and fine tuning it when you've got a manuscript to work on.
Yeah. And that's why you have an editor to take to say, hey, she smiled 5 times now, take that out.
That's true. Actually, you know what the most common one is? The most common one is Jack sat down, but he wasn't standing to begin with. I notice this all the time. Standing up and sitting down are often thrown in there. That's what I noticed.
Or you forget they're wearing a coat, or they've got 3 hands, and one of them's up there, and one of them's over there, and one of them's down there. Hang on, they can't be holding all those things.
There's a tip to help with that, I hope, which is to write your scenes discreetly, to write them all at once, and then write a new scene. Don't stop your writing in the middle of a scene, because when you come back and pick it up again, you'll forget if he was standing or sitting. But if you write it all, it's all in your head, theoretically.
Jill Mansell, the romantic comedy author, says she always stops when she reaches the word count, even if it's the middle of a sentence, because I think, I might be misquoting her here, but I think she said the reasoning there is if she finishes the scene, she's less likely to want to sort of dive back in the next day. But if it's half finished, then she wants to go back to it, and will therefore have more of an incentive to get back into it. I don't know. I feel like it would be nagging at me all night if I just let
Yeah.
it.
I think I'd be the same. I'd be doing that thing where you wake up in the night and write on your notes app more thoughts of what to do next, which happens to me all the time. And I always think I've written down genius story ideas in the middle of the night, and I wake up and they are not
I
genius,
once
shall we
wrote
just
down one
say.
and it just said over 18's cake shop, and I still don't know what I was thinking what the story was going to be.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, firstly, to Betty and Gracie for being here today to talk about their brilliant new novels, Wartime with the Cornish Girls and Edie's Home for Strays, both of which are available in paperback and ebook and audiobook now. And also thank you so much to everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you.